I love to travel and I'm always up for a new adventure. So I can see sights, take in the culture, and of course, all the flavors. But you know, there's something comforting about revisiting a place that I have found special. When the opportunity came up for me to revisit the beautiful city of Lisbon, well, I snapped at the chance because I knew I wanted to take a deep dive into the world of pastry. Yes, I am here to demystify that delicious pastel de nata, the famous Portuguese custard tart. My latest trip to Lisbon was a bit of an extended layover. I had just over 2 days to learn about how these custard tarts are made. I was lucky enough to get the behind the scenes tour, Pastéis de Belém, and they make thousands and thousands of them. It's unbelievable. Now first, I need to point out, I wasn't able to get into the secret room where the pastry is made from scratch and the custard filling. This is the secret part. But what I was able to see was the tarts being assembled and baked. And I learned so much just from those moments. That puff pastry style of dough, very different from a French style of puff pastry, is stretched and portioned into little pieces and then pressed into those tart pans. That entire part of the kitchen is run and operated by women. And I was allowed to get in there and actually try my hand at pressing in the pastry. I was definitely corrected because my technique was not very polished. I was humbled and honored to be in the presence of these talented women who could work so quickly. After that, these tart shells are moved to a separate room where they're filled with these still warm custards, poured into a hopper, and then each of the tarts are filled to the exact same amount with that warm, fragrant pastry cream. After that, we move things on to a different part of the kitchen, and it's just a bank of ovens. And I don't know that I've ever stood in a room so hot. It was like an oven itself because it takes a high temperature to bake these custard tarts. There was one person attending to them so carefully, opening and closing the ovens and making sure those tarts had just the right amount of browning on the surface and the pastry was cooked fully underneath. After a bit of cooling, well, they're ready to sell because at Pastéis de Belém, you enjoy your custard tarts warm or at room temperature, and then you have the option to dust them with icing sugar or a mix of icing sugar and cinnamon. I liked appreciating the custard tart just in its natural state. There's a reason that these custard tarts are famous around the world. They are absolutely delicious. They're very popular here in Canada, so as soon as I returned home, well, I wanted to get right to work and create a recipe that came as close as I could to replicating that original pastel de nata, of course, without being allowed into that secret room. In looking at the two parts, the pastry base and the custard, let's start with that pastry base. Having seen the pastry being made and knowing it's not a French style of puff pastry with cold butter, I thought, okay, I need some way to get tenderness and flavor yet structure into it. So I am taking my favorite pie dough recipe and adapting it so that it becomes flakier and earns that custard filling within. So to start my pie dough, I already have my all-purpose flour measured into my mixer. You can do this also by hand using a pastry blender. In addition to the flour, I'm adding a bit of sugar, not for sweetness so much as to help contribute to the tenderness of the pastry. And I will add my salt. As I give this a stir, I'm going to add 3 tablespoons of vegetable oil. This coats the flour so that when it's time to add the water, it doesn't absorb too quickly into the flour. That too helps keep the dough nice and tender. You won't see any visible change to the flour once you've added the oil, so you just give it about 30 seconds and you know the flour is coated. Now it's time to add my butter. It has softened a little bit. When I make my pie pastry, I don't use ice cold butter because I find it simply takes longer to work in, it works in unevenly, and then I'm at risk of toughening up the pastry dough because it takes longer to mix. So you can pull your butter out 15 to 30 minutes ahead of time, and then I'll just portion it up. I'm using unsalted butter because I've already added the salt to my dough. I'll add this a few pieces at a time to the flour while it's mixing. Once you see that there are no longer any big pieces of butter, then it's time to add your liquid. I've got a 1/4 cup of cold water and 2 teaspoons of lemon juice. You could use white vinegar if you want. The acidity in the lemon juice helps promote an elasticity to the dough, so it will roll without cracking but still hold its shape. I did a bit of a whirlwind tour. While I love eating at restaurants, enjoying the fish, being so close to the water, the culture, the architecture, the beautiful downtown of Lisbon, I did get outside of the city center and went up to Sintra. In Sintra, I was able to visit an amazing little bakery, Piriquita, and there's a lineup outside the door. That's how popular it is. And they have their own pastry specialties. There's the pillowy pastry with the almond cream filling, the cinnamon sweet tarts, confections, and it was great to even get behind the scenes and see how all of these pastries were handmade, even after generations. What I thought was really funny is in walking around Sintra and even in downtown Lisbon, running into so many Canadians. We as Canadians do love traveling, it's true, but we met so many Canadian visitors to Portugal, even people from my own hometown, go figure, and we were all after the same thing, enjoying the pastry. There we go, the dough has come together. This recipe makes enough pie dough for a 2-crust fruit pie, if you're making a traditional fruit pie, but because I'm making custard tarts, I need to treat it a little differently. So what I'm going to do is shape this into one disc and then actually flatten it out into a square. Don't worry about it being too precise at this point, but the square shape will make it easier to roll for the next step. Now you want to give this pie dough a chance to chill so it's easier to roll because I'm adding a step in the process to give this dough a bit of flakiness. Now that the dough has had a chance to chill, it's time for that extra step where I laminate it. I want to add an extra layer of butter so that the pastry layers can bake apart a little bit, giving the custard tart a bit of flakiness. So what you want to do is flour your work surface a little bit. And then with small motions, I'll start rolling out the dough. It is cool a little bit. You can pull it out kind of like the butter for your pie dough, about 15 or 30 minutes before you want to roll. And if you find it starts cracking in the center, flip your dough upside down, because a crack tends to develop because you're putting the pressure from the top of your pin down, so it pulls open underneath. Flipping it over will seal it back together. Instead of stretching the dough out like they did at Pastéis de Belém, I've rolled it out. It's about 6 millimeters thick and I've got it in a rectangle shape. Now it's time for the lamination. In the rolling room at Pastéis de Belém, the women were pulling the dough and stretching it, and it was actually covered with butter on the outside and in. And I just thought, in a home kitchen, that could get a little messy, actually a lot messy. So I wanted to do it more approachable. So what I'm doing is I'm adding a little additional butter, not too much, just 5 tablespoons, 75 grams. Now this butter is at room temperature, so I'm just going to give it a little stir to make sure it's nice and soft. And then I smear it on top of the dough. The method for making French puff pastry is to take a square of butter, chilling it, and then you fold dough around it repeatedly. In this case, I'm taking the soft butter, spreading it in an even layer, and then rolling up the dough. So it builds in the flakiness in a different way, but the end result is fantastic. I want to take a moment and spread this butter so it's a nice, even, level layer. Push it out to the edges. If you've ever made cinnamon buns, you would do this with your butter brown sugar mixture. And now starting from one of the short sides, You want to roll it quite tightly because you don't want a hole in the center. Like so. Now, because the dough has softened up a bit, I want to give this a chance to chill. And in that time, I can make the pastry cream, the heart of the Portuguese custard tart. What I love about Portuguese custard tarts is that they're simple but complex at the same time. So working in richness means you use a combination of half and half cream and milk. So it's richer than a typical pastry cream. First, the half and half, which is 10% cream. And the milk. And because I have to heat the cream and milk together, this is a great opportunity to work in flavor. Now, in a traditional French pastry cream, you would add vanilla flavoring, but the history of this custard tart is so rich, and it was before vanilla was a common ingredient. So to add some flavor, traditionally you would add cinnamon stick and some lemon zest. So I'm just going to take the peel off a lemon using a vegetable peeler. 1, 2, 3, maybe 4. And this adds such a beautiful perfume to the milk, and it's not overwhelming, so it serves the same function as using vanilla would. I've got my milk and cream heating at medium-high heat, so you want to give it time to let that flavor infuse into it. In the meantime, I'll get the rest of my custard ingredients ready. I have 5 egg yolks, and to that, I'll add a bit of cornstarch and my sugar. I'll give that a little whisk. Once the cream and milk has heated up, I remove the cinnamon sticks and lemon peel and then slowly add the hot milk to my egg mixture. Before you start that, you want to make sure you have a bowl ready with a bit of butter and a strainer, because you do want to strain your custard to make sure it is absolutely silky. So now I'll remove the lemon peel and cinnamon. And you want to slowly, gradually add your milk at first. So we're tempering the eggs, warming them up by adding the milk and cream a little at a time. And then once you have that going, you can add the rest very quickly. Now this goes all back in the pot, back on the stove to cook up until it thickens up. Stay. You want to return your custard to a full simmer. This takes about 3 minutes. You still want your heat on medium, just barely above medium. While I wasn't able to see the custard actually being made at Pastéis de Belém, I was able to see its consistency and color when it was still warm from being freshly made. And there we go, we've got some bubbles, so I know the custard's cooked and still cooking. Woo! Now I'll get this into a bowl. Getting this out of the hot pot will help stop the cooking, so will that little bit of butter at the bottom of the bowl. And I just give this a quick stir just to make sure the butter is fully melted. Oh, I can smell the lemon and the cinnamon, but it's subtle. Now I want to let the custard cool for about 15 minutes. That way it's not going hot from the stove into a hot oven. So I'll cover it with plastic, but that's the perfect amount of time to roll out my pastry shells. When I was behind the scenes at Pastéis de Belém, I noticed they have that distinctive tart shell shape. It's a little more open as a flute, but I find if you're making these at home, a muffin tin works perfectly well. It's the right portion. So I've lightly greased it. And now I have my chilled laminated dough, and it's time to portion it up. Almost like they did at the bakery But of course, this is a cooler dough. I'm gonna have to roll it as opposed to pressing it into each shell. So what I'll do, and you can see a bit of the lamination, is I'm going to cut 12 portions of my dough. Oh, look at that. You can see that beautiful butter spiral. And I'll cut each of these into 3. It's important to divide the dough into equal pieces. That way they each get rolled once, because this spiral of butter is now going to get pressed and flattened as I roll it for each tart. A little flour. And start with slow motions, and just like rolling out the larger piece of dough, you can flip it over and you can see how that spiral stays in place. So as that tart shell bakes, that's where that flakiness is going to kick in. So I'm just going to keep rolling here, little montagey business. Now these are all set to fill. My pastry cream is still warm, but it's not hot anymore. And it's up to you if you want to ladle, use 2 spoons, or use a piping bag to fill the tarts. And now to fill. Filling these tarts with the warm pastry cream is new for me, and it's a tip I picked up from visiting Pastéis de Belém. I have made these before with a chilled pastry cream, and they do work just fine, but you have to add about 5 minutes to your bake time. I've preheated my oven to 375, and these take 25 to 30 minutes, so 30 to 35 minutes if you're working with a cold custard. And what you're looking for, a deep golden brown on the pastry and a caramelization on top of that tart. Oh, it lends such a beautiful flavor to these. Oh, look at these gems. Aren't they gorgeous? I love how you get the caramelization of the sugar and milk on top. It adds complexity to the flavor. You will find when you pull your tarts out of the oven, the custard will be souffled, and as the tarts cool, you get that concave look in each. And to me, that's what makes it look like an authentic pastel de nata. And I can't wait to dive in. I love the look of these tarts. And you can really pick up that texture, the flakiness of the pastry. I'm gonna take another bite to reveal more. I will take one for the team. That custard is so creamy. The pastry is flaky and tender. I know there's no knowing the secret behind the true pastel de nata, but I feel confident that you will enjoy making my take on the Portuguese custard tart. Please give it a try. And if you get a chance to go to Lisbon, please taste not just one, but many pastéis de nata. Obrigado!